intense. You can never put it into human words. I don't care how many billions you put on the feeling of intensity. It still doesn't even compare to how intense the feeling is that you get there. The colors there don't exist here, and they're the most beautiful colors you could ever lay your eyes on, you know?
I am here today with Tammy Cheney, and she's had a profound near-death experience. Tammy, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
I'm excited.
Yes, me too. So we'll start at the beginning, and if you wouldn't mind sharing your near-death experience, but also your personal story leading up to that, anything that you're comfortable sharing.
Okay. My spiritual experiences started when I was 3 years old. And a little bit of background on that. I grew up in a household where there was a lot of severe abuse, and it was every type of abuse that you could possibly experience, and it was on an everyday basis. And one of the things that my mom would do to me at 3 years old is she would lock me in this closet that was like a food closet. So it was just like this thin closet, and in the very bottom, she had that opened, and I would be locked up in there. And at first, it was really super scary because, of course, I was a 3-year-old being locked up in this little dark cubby, basically. But as she continued to do it, I began to, an entity, that's the only way I can describe it, an entity began to join me in the closet and speak to me. And later on in life, I did begin to call this entity God. But at 3 years old, of course, I don't know no name to call it. I just know that I was having these wonderful conversations as a 3-year-old, as much of a conversation I could possibly have as a 3-year-old. So the experience wasn't so scary for me. I was able to, okay, I'm being locked up in the closet. I guess I'll be with my friend, So as time went by, we moved from that place and went to a new place. And in the new place, the abuse actually began to get more severe at that time. And now I'm 5 years old. And what began to happen to me is I started having out-of-body experiences. Now, I didn't know what an out-of-body experience was. I didn't even know that it was called an out-of-body experience. And I was not aware that everybody else was not experiencing this as well. I thought it was normal. And so my first out-of-body experiences were I was super scared. Like, I could not figure out why the inside of my body was coming to the outside of my body. But once I got out, I was in the most wonderful realm that, and it wasn't like a realm different than Earth realm. My whole surroundings looked exactly the same, but the feeling of where I was at, it was just a feeling of just the most intense love that you could feel, the most intense peace, the most intense joy. And it was so wonderful to be out of the body. And literally I would just explore, I would go outside, I would go, different places, but I'd always generally stay near my body. I think that to explain the experience more, when somebody has a near-death experience and they come out of their body and they're looking at their body down, laying in the hospital bed, basically they're still in the same surroundings, but they're obviously in another realm. So that's the only way that I could describe it. I was still in the same surroundings, but I was in a different realm. And I would just explore, and there really was no time frame, I don't know how long I was gone, exploring or anything like that, but I'd have to come back to my body. And once I had to come back to my body, I'm looking at my body laying there, and I'm like freaking out. No, I don't want to go back in there. But it was as if I didn't have the permission basically to make a choice whether I go in or out. I was going back in and that was it. So I'd always go back in, and this was happening to me continuously. Like, it was happening very, very often. And at some point in time, it came to a time where I would actually know it was going to happen hours before it was going to happen, because I would start to feel, and the only way I can describe it is I would feel this tingling in my body. So I knew it's going to happen, you know, and I knew that it was going to happen in a few hours or so or whatever. It generally happened once I went into my room, laid down to go to bed at night, and then that would be when it would happen. And so fast forward, we moved from that place, we moved to a new house. And now this is the house that I grew up in. The abuse is still extremely horrible, just intense abuse, and every type of abuse that you could be going through. And so what began to happen in that house is a entity began to visit me. And this entity, I know that there's definitely a dark energy and there's a light energy, because this entity was definitely scary, and it was always scary. And every time it would come and visit me, I was scared to death. And so I would always cover my head and hide from it and stuff like that. And I know that the entity was a very heavy entity, because we had a cat that lived in the house, and it was my mom's cat. It did not like children at all. And this cat, on a couple of occasions, one that I can specifically remember, it came into the room and jumped up on the bed and was under the covers with me, like shaking, like I was scared, because it was well aware of this entity. And obviously it was scary enough for the cat to come in my room and be shaking too. So in that time frame of me living at that house, I had an experience where me, my mom, and my grandma went to my grandma's camper, and which was like 3 hours away, to camp for the weekend. And for whatever reason, that specific day, I got in trouble for something. I had to stand in the corner. I couldn't have been any more than like 7 years old. So I had to stand in the corner, and my grandma and my mom left the camper to go take showers at the shower stalls at the campground. So what ended up happening in that experience is, when they walked out the door, for some reason, I went with them, but my body stayed in the corner, if that makes sense. I stayed in the corner, and I went with them all the way to the showers. I watched them go through the whole motion of showering, everything that they did, watched everything that happened, watched them walking back to the camper. And literally, as soon as they opened the door, it was exactly what I saw. As soon as the door opened, it was like I literally jumped out of my skin. I was actually in the corner right next to the door. And I literally jumped out of my skin, because I could not believe that I went with them, but my body was still here in the corner. And so, you know, I had those spiritual experiences became like normal in my life. I assumed they were normal. I assumed everybody else were dealing with those experiences. And I was just, you know, I just wasn't processing them well, I guess. And that's why it was always so scary, you know, in certain situations for me. So fast forward, once I get to middle school, that's when I realized that this isn't normal. I get into middle school and I realized this isn't normal. And the entity that I was speaking to when I was 3 years old, when I was locked up in that closet, I continually had communication with that entity every day, all day. And that's what really opened my eyes when I hit middle school, and I realized other people were not speaking to that entity. So fast forward from there, I ended up being in a marriage that was an abusive marriage. I guess people that have went through the things that I went through throughout my childhood, tend to end up in an abusive relationship. So this was my first husband, and he specifically tried to kill me. He literally tried to kill me. And so I had to go and stay in a protective type home because I couldn't go back home. I was too afraid that he would come back and get me basically. So I went into this home called the Sunlight Home. And in that home, that's when I feel like I experienced what I call a near-death experience. I had a lot of head trauma. I don't know exactly how it happened, how the experience. All I know is I was in the house where I had been for about a month at that point, and I went into the room that was assigned for me, and literally all I did was sit on the bed, and I leaned back on the headboard that was behind the bed. And as soon as I did that, I instantly left my body. I was instantly in another place where what I've always called this place is a paradise place. And I'm so thankful that I have seen multiple NDEs now where these people had to have definitely been to the same place that I had been. But in this place, there was a long dirt road over to the side of me here. There were trees and flowers. Flowers were everywhere, but the trees were on this side. Off to the distance over here was this structure that was it was very old type looking, an old timey looking, basically, maybe 1800s, 1700s, I don't know. But it was sort of almost like a castle structure. And behind me were a whole bunch of beings that were shaped in form, but they had this glow over them. That's the only way that I can describe it. They had this glow over them. And right next to me on the right and right next to me on the left were two beings that were walking with me, which they also had a sense of a glow to them. So instantly when I got there, I got these two beings next to me. I'm looking at my scenery, and I literally see the most beautiful trees, the most beautiful flowers, the most beautiful scenery I've ever seen in my life. And it's so hard to describe. And I see this time and time again with other people's NDEs. The colors that you see are colors that do not exist here. You cannot remake them. You can't, there's no way that you can make these colors. The green, the leaves on the trees, the green on the leaves on the trees were a green that was the most beautiful green you could ever see. And it was almost like they were translucent. That's the only way that I can describe it. Like they were crystals, maybe. I don't know. But as we walked down the road, I'm just I'm in awe. That's the only way I can describe it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful place I've ever seen in my life. And the flowers, the thing about the flowers were, they were also like this translucent type crystals, but they weren't just one solid color. They had multiple beautiful colors on. And the flowers, as you're walking, you never see the back of the flower. As you're walking, it turns with you the whole time. So the whole time you're seeing the face of that flower, the beauty of it. And the smell that was in the air was it was the most beautiful smell of, I don't even know how, an aroma of smell that was millions of flowers, I guess you could say, millions of flowers. The aroma was so good. And there was also music. I don't know where the music exactly was coming from, but the music was in everything. So as we're walking, in front of my visual of directly in front of me, this was the most powerful part of this whole experience. But there was this light And when I say this light, it wasn't this big. It was big light, basically. And as I'm seeing this light, the only way that I can describe it, and when I use the word God, I don't mean God like what the church says God. I mean, I knew that this was the ultimate of everything that existed, of all creation. I knew. And the light that emanated off that light was in everything. It was in everything. In fact, I looked over my shoulder, and that's actually when I saw the group of beings that were off to the distance behind me, and I noticed that we weren't casting a shadow. And when I realized we weren't casting a shadow, I instantly looked at the two guys and I said, wow, we're not casting a shadow. And one of the entities turned and looked at me like immediately and was like, there's no darkness here. And I was like, wow, what do you mean there's no darkness here? So I literally squatted down on the ground and I cuffed my hand like this, and I left a hole. And I put my hand down on the ground and I looked through the hole, and literally you could not even make darkness. That's how much this light was in and through. Like everything had this light. I knew that was the creator. And then the emotional aspect of it is the feeling. Like when I would have my out-of-body experiences, I felt this immense unconditional love, joy, peace. Like it was the best feelings that you could feel. But in this place, the feeling of love was the biggest one. Love, in fact, love was the definition of everything, basically. But the feeling of love, there is never, ever, there will probably never, ever be a human word that you can describe of the intenseness of this love. It is beyond anything that you could ever describe. It is beyond any word that you could ever use. It's hundreds of thousands of millions of billions more intense than what you could ever describe any type of love here, or even the word love. Like even the word love here is not even love. Truly, it was that intense. You know what I mean? And so as I'm walking, we're walking towards, as if we're going towards that building. And I'm freaking out. That's the only way I can describe it. I was freaking out, and I was going on and on about how beautiful everything was, how beautiful the trees were, how intense the feeling of love was. And all I did was looked at one of the entities that was walking with me, and I said, I can't wait to get back and tell everybody, because, you know, I just wanted to tell everybody, you know? And as soon as I said that, I was instantly back in my body, and now back in the room that I sat in. And I really don't know how much time went by, but I can say that when I sat on that bed and leaned back, it was light outside. When I came back, it was already dark outside. So I don't really pay attention to time. But I couldn't even put a time frame on it. I really couldn't. I just know that when I sat on my bed, it was light, and when I got back, it was dark out. So what ended up happening once I got back there, so now this home was a home where multiple women that had went through the same thing that I went through would be at. So instantly, all I want to do is get up now and go tell all the girls what just happened to me. And so I get up and I go out of my room to go talk to the girls, and the only way that I can describe it is I feel like I brought the light back with me. And it was almost as if I was in like this bubble of light because I went out of my room and I was silenced and I couldn't speak. All I could feel was the light that was around me, even though it wasn't visible. I could just feel the feeling of like I brought a piece of where I was just at back with me, and it was all just basically light. So these girls are like walking past me and I can't even speak to them. And to be honest with you, that would be an abnormal scene in that house. When we were walking around in the house, we would generally passing by, would have conversations with each other, but it's almost, and I know this might sound weird, but it was almost as if they couldn't see me walking by them because nobody spoke to me. And I walked through the whole house, came back and just went right back into my room because I couldn't speak. Like my mouth wouldn't let me say any words for some reason. That's the only way I can describe it. So I went back in my room and I just hung out in my room probably for another couple hours. And my head all of a sudden said, I wonder if you can speak yet. And I opened my mouth and I just said like 3 or 4 simple words just to see if noise was going to come out of my mouth, and it did. So at that point, of course, I jumped up, I ran out of the room, I started telling all the girls what had happened to me and this, that, and the other. And of course, they thought I was crazy and they could not comprehend, because when you have an experience like that, so when you have not had an experience like that, you cannot comprehend this information coming from somebody. But it didn't stop me. I went to every one of my friends. They all cut me out of their life. They thought I lost my mind. In fact, I had this girl that I was friends with since high school. And I was 24 at that time, by the way. So high school was like, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And I used to pick her daughters up to bring them to school with my kids. And she would prime her daughters before they get in the car with me. Don't listen to anything Tammy says. She's crazy. I just need her to take you guys to school. And of course, the girls loved me. So they get in the car. Yeah, my mom just said not to listen to anything that you say, that you're crazy. So, but it didn't stop me. But as time went by, at that time, I don't even know if people talked about, because that was in 1998. I don't think people talked about near-death experiences. I don't think they talked about any type of experiences like that, to be honest with you, because I never heard of it before that. You know what I mean? And nobody else was talking the way that I was talking. You know what I mean? So as time went by, I eventually learned just to keep my mouth shut and not say nothing at all. And that keeps me out of trouble and people don't think I'm crazy. So I did kind of silence myself, but through that whole time, or at that time actually, of going through that experience, I started getting involved with church, basically for the first time in my life. And I really truly thought that that's where I was going to find people like me, if that makes sense. So I went to church hoping to find people like me. And so the first church that I went to, they didn't really want to hear about stuff like that. In fact, it was more labeled like witchcraft and stuff like that, which I don't really understand. So I learned real quick to be silent in that church for the time that I attended. I was only there for like maybe six months. And then I was like, I got to find another church. There's got to be another church. So at that point, I went church hopping. I went from church to church to church, trying to look for people that were like me, basically, that have had all the experiences that I have, including, that whole like near-death experience that I had that was so mind-blowing to me that I knew that there had to have been somebody in church, because that's the place to go for those kinds of things. So I've been to multiple different churches. I've been to non-denominational, Methodist, Baptist, charismatic, every type of church that you could possibly go to, and not one could I find the things that I was experiencing being being spiritually accepted, I guess you could say. And the last church that I was in, oh my gosh, the last church that I was in, when I was actually part of the group that started that church. The youth pastor from the last church that I was at, he started his own church, and he married this woman. They became the pastors of the church. They invited whoever from the other church that want to follow them. And it was literally like 5 of us that started this church. So I was pretty close with the pastors, being that I was like the beginning group of this church. And they said, this is going to be different, and we're going to tap into the spiritual realm. So eventually I began to talk about my spiritual experiences with them, and how they took it is basically how all the churches take it. They felt like I had some kind of demonic oppression. And what they would do is they would have these things that were called encounters with God. And it was a retreat where you would leave for the weekend, you would drive like to some retreat center, like 3 hours away. And there you would get deliverance of whatever you needed deliverance from. And that experience was so horrifying for me, because I would watch what they were doing. They were like forcing people to like throw up and make this whole scene as if people are getting delivered. And the whole time I'm sitting there, I'm looking at the people around me, and I'm looking at what is going on. And I'm like freaking out, like, oh my gosh, if there's anything that's demonic and evil, it's what's going on here right now. And so that was the last church that I ended up attending, because I was like, no, there's definitely something wrong with the church. And I said, this isn't right. This activity is not right. It has nothing to do with having a spiritual relationship with the creator that created all, and nothing to do with spiritual experiences. And I got out of the church. I was out of the church at that point. And at that point, I wanted to, because when you go to church, you're told, oh, go home and study your Bible, but you know that you're not going to go home and study your Bible, because you got to go home, you got to take care of the kids, you got to cook, you got to clean, you got to do all these things. And there's really not much time to be able to do what they were telling you to do. And they're pretty much expecting you're not going to go home and basically study your Bible. So when I left everything, I went to the creator and I said, I just want to know the truth, because I've had so many experiences, and I'm actually going to back up just for a second. When I left the church, I left everything. I left in an RV, and I left everything. I left my condo. I lived in Southwest Florida, like right down the road from the beach. I got rid of my condo. I left in an RV, and I just went on the road. I mean, that's how traumatized I was from just basically my whole church experience. And at that point I was like, who can I trust? If I can't trust the church, who can I trust? And I left and I went on the road. So I began at that point, I basically just gave my hands and feet to the creator. And I said, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'll say whatever you want me to say, and I'll go wherever you want me to go. I had no destination. I just got in and just left. So in my travels, I began to have experiences where people would approach me at my RV. And for whatever reason, I knew that I needed to talk to them about whatever I needed to talk to them about. I didn't know at that point, but I needed to invite them in and get a feel for the situation and what would end up happening to me. And this is the only way that I can describe it. I would have these people in my RV, and this energy literally would come through my head, through my whole entire body. And once that happened, something took over me. And it's like, when it happens to you, there's no scared feelings. There's no feelings of, you have no negative emotion when that happens to you. So what ended up happening is, once that feeling of energy came through me, words would start coming out of my mouth, but I didn't know what I was speaking. I could not see, or I could not hear what I was speaking to these people. And whatever it was that I was saying was obviously blowing these people away because the looks on their face, they were just mind blown by whatever it was that was coming out of my mouth. But one of the experiences that I had in that same atmosphere, I was with a couple of people. It was a girl and a guy. And what ended up happening this time, and my son was with me at that time also. And what happened that time is the same thing that always happens. The energy comes through my whole body, so I know I just basically give into it, so I know that something's about to happen. But this specific experience, words start coming out of my mouth, and then all of a sudden, I'm standing here, my physical body standing here, and now I've separated from myself, so now I got me standing behind me, and I'm watching myself speak, and I actually now can physically hear what I'm saying. And I'm standing behind me, and I'm looking at myself, and I got my hands crossed like this. I'm like, wow, where are these words coming from? Oh my gosh, this is so powerful, you know? And it was just such a mind-blowing experience, you know what I mean? So I don't know what happened, but once I separated myself from the church, like, I began to have more very profound, powerful experiences. So I got to the point where I was like, I just got to know the truth. I need to know the truth. You know what I mean? And so I began studying. I spent literally a whole year reading the entire Bible from front to back, from back to front. I'm telling you, I did not miss a word, and I read it over. I actually did the audiobook, so it was, I'm seeing it and I'm hearing it at the same time. And I literally did every book. Like, I start with Genesis, and I listened to it multiple times, and then I'd start with Exodus. I went through the whole Bible. And what I began to see is the Old Testament, for one thing, is just a bloodbath. Like, it is literally, it's just killing men, women, and prophets supposedly sent to take out whole cities, to kill all the men, women, and children. How are the children being punished? You know what I mean? Because they're technically not, I guess, following whatever the laws were at that time. Or they'd have it where they'd send a prophet in and say, kill all the men, but save the women and children and do whatever you please to do with them. So you got women being sold into slavery, children being sold into slavery for whatever they want to do to these people. And then you got, you know, men that they owe debts. And the way that they pay for their debts is they sell their daughters to the debt, you know, the person they owe a debt to, you know. And I don't know if people know this, but when women go off in the old, you know, the age frame, or the age of when women are sent off with, like, you know, to pay a debt or to even get married, they're like 11, 12, 13, they're babies, they're children. You know what I mean? And so I realized that the Old Testament was just, I felt like I was watching a horror flick. I'm like, I can't believe that this is like considered the Holy Bible. So then I get to the New Testament, I do the same thing, listen to every book over and over and over again, so that I hear every word, and I see what I realize what I'm hearing here. And you know, I'll be honest with you. I feel like the Old Testament God is definitely different than the New Testament God. There's two different gods there. It's not the same God. And in the New Testament, there's also nuggets of gold, I guess you could say, as, like, to give you an example, I know that we as humans, we're the light of the world. You know what I mean? We are the light of the world. So when it says you are the light of the world, I know that that's a nugget of gold. You know what I mean? And it's literally just tiny bits and pieces that are in there. But what I learned about the New Testament is everything in there is contradictory to each other. Not one book actually lines up with the next book. And even though they're supposed to, when you do them side by, you take Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you put them all right in front of you, and you read each individual story that's supposed to be the same story through all of them. None of them match. In fact, they're so contradictory to each other. It makes absolutely no sense that nobody's recognizing this, you know what I mean, and realizing this. And so, so I got through that whole period, and I realized that, this is man-made writings and control-based, function to control the masses. And then I went from there to, I actually went straight to, I all of a sudden saw my first near-death experience video. It just all of a sudden popped up. I was like, oh, wow, this looks interesting. So I watched it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's actually people out there that are like me. There's actually people that have experienced something in other realms. And my whole life, my whole life changed when I found near-death experiences. And that was literally like maybe a year and a half ago. I started watching near-death experiences. And I was so blown away. And once I experienced that and started realizing that there are some things that these people actually say that are exactly what I experienced. Like, because I have an experience where I will just, this is what I call it leaving the room. I could be sitting right here in this room, and then all of a sudden I'll be in another room, and that's the only way I can describe it. And this room I call the white room. It's a white room, a light room, but the only thing is it doesn't really have walls. That's the only way I can describe it. I call it a room, but it doesn't really have walls. And when I go in there, I get all kinds of downloads of information. And it's not information that I can just tell you right now. It's information that comes out whenever it feels like it. And I don't even know when I leave the present and go into the white room. I just know that I'm in the white room where I've been multiple times. And then now I'm back. But when I come back, I know that I was just in the white room. I just don't know when that separation happened when I left. I just know when I come back. And so I came to the point where I realized that, I started studying other religions, and I started studying, everything that had to do with like church type stuff. And I realized that they're cults, they're communities that suck people in and keep them from being able to experience like actual spiritual experiences. I mean, you will go into a church, and when they're playing music, you'll feel like different types of feelings, but it's not, it's so much more beyond that. This spirit, the spiritual realm and the spiritual sense that's literally just right outside of our bodies, they are, I really believe that they're set up to keep people in a box, basically, where they actually don't ever really get to experience what's really here, what really exists. So anyway, so basically I broke out of the whole church thing, and now I'm just living how free, like how I always felt like I should be able to live. And I've broken out of the box, and I'm living whatever spirit wants from me, whatever plan there is for me. I'm just going with it, and I'm open to it, and I'm ready to experience whatever it is that I need to experience as time goes by. Can I talk about one more experience?
Yes, please.
Okay, so when I left the Sunlight home, that home that I was in, I got my own apartment. I had my little boy, and I had my new baby because I was pregnant at the time. I actually gave birth to my baby while I was in that home. And because it was actually a home for pregnant women too. I was abused while I was 6 months pregnant when my husband at the time tried to kill me. And so this was a home for pregnant women. And so I had my daughter, and now I'm living out on my own. This is like 6 months later. I have my own place, and my son at the time was 3 years old. So where I lived in this little duplex. My brother rented one side of the duplex, I rented the other side, and then the owners of the property had the house that was on all the same property. So in my backyard, there was a swimming pool, and that specific swimming pool did not have a gate around it. There was only a gate around the whole property, but the swimming pool did not have a gate around it. So, so this specific day, my brother had just come home from work, and he always comes over to my side to have conversations with me. My daughter, which was the baby, she was laying down for a nap, so she was sleeping, and my 3-year-old, which is running around and playing. So my brother starts getting into this conversation with me, and it was literally not a conversation that I wanted to have. So, I didn't want to be rude and make him feel bad, but so I let him continue to talk. And my 3-year-old's like, "Can I just go outside and play?" Because I had my back door open and I was standing at the back door. And he's like, "I just want to go right outside and play." And I was like, okay, just stay right here in this area. And so he goes outside to play. I'm still standing in the doorway with the door wide open. My brother's in front of me, and he's having this big, huge, long, drawn out conversation. So we're in this conversation probably for a good 20 minutes, maybe even half an hour. And thankfully, my daughter wakes up in her room, and that stops the conversation. I'm like, "Oh, I got to get the baby. She's waking up from nappy, So before I walk to go get the baby, I just glanced basically over my shoulder to see where my 3-year-old is. And when I glanced over my shoulder, he was actually floating face first in the pool. So he had drowned. The pool was literally like 10 feet away from my back door, and I didn't even hear him go in the water or anything. He might have just walked down the stairs or something, I don't know. But he was floating in the deep end of the pool. So of course, me and my brother, we instantly run over to the pool to pull him out of the water. And I don't know if people know this, but he was only 3 years old, and he may have weighed like 40 pounds. I don't know. But when somebody drowns, their whole body fills with water. So it literally took me and my brother to pull him up out of the water because his body was so heavy we couldn't pull him out. And he literally just laid him in my lap. So, his head's here, his legs are here, and I can obviously see that he was dead. His eyelids were blue, his lips were blue, his fingernails were blue. And the first thing that I did was I laid my head down on his chest to see if he had a heartbeat, and he didn't have no heartbeat. And at that time, I had no idea what to do to bring him back to life. So I looked up at my brother and I was like, "Please do something to save him." And my brother's like, "I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do." And he took off running. Now, I didn't know why he took off running, and it wasn't even a thought in my mind, what he was possibly doing. I thought he was scared and took off running and didn't want to be here when the police came, because maybe he had some kind of paraphernalia in his apartment and he didn't want to get busted or whatever. I didn't know where he went, but here I'm stuck now with my dead child basically in my arms, and this really happens in real life, okay? I looked up in my neighborhood, and literally I lived in a neighborhood where houses were all around me. Like they're next to each other, houses right next to each other. But when I looked up to scream for help, my vision, this is the only way I can describe it, is my vision went like this. It went woo, 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 woo. And it's almost like if you've seen like a scary movie where somebody's running down a hallway, but all of a sudden the hallway keeps getting longer and longer and longer. Well, that's how the neighborhood looked to me. My vision went woo, 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 woo. And all of a sudden, all the houses around me looked like they were so far away. So instantly, I felt the feeling of fear of, oh my gosh, nobody's even going to hear me scream, So my next thought in my head, the only thing that I could think of doing was to look up to the sky and scream out to God and say, "God, please show me what to do." And of course I'm all like hysterical looking saying it. And as soon as I said that, instantly I had this voice that was the same voice that I was speaking to in the closet at 3 years old. And it began to show me what to do to bring my little boy back to life. So it began to walk me through CPR. So as it's given me the instructions, I'm doing everything that it's telling me to do. You know, it tells me, you know, plug his nose, put your mouth on his mouth and blow in. And I don't know if people know this, but when you blow into somebody's mouth that has drowned, the feeling that you get is the same feeling as if you have a straw in a cup and you blow and it goes blah, 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 blah. So I'm blowing in his mouth and I can feel the blah, 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 blah in his body, like wherever that water was, it was bubbling like you're blowing a straw in a cup. And when I took my mouth off of him, all of a sudden water just started, like, it ain't like what you see on the movies, okay? It comes out like water here, water out of his nose, water out of his ears. It just comes out in every hole that it can possibly come out. And it's a very large amount. And so once the water stopped coming out, the God told me, okay, now I want you to put your hand on his chest, you know, and it was such a calm voice. I just wish that I could allow you guys just to hear how peaceful and loving and calm this voice was, but there's just no, I'm just not able to mimic that. But he said, put your hand on his heart, on it, or not on his heart, on his chest, and I want you to just push 3 times. And that's exactly what it said, was 3 times. So I put my hand on his chest. I don't know if I was putting it in the right spot, but I just went 1, 2, 3. And as soon as I did that, his eyelids opened up and his eyeballs rolled back in his head, and it creeped the living daylights out of me. But as soon as that happened, I literally had another voice over here that said to me, and it was just like this, he's dead now. Like, it was a condescending voice that was like instantly made me start freaking out. Like, I thought now he's really dead because that voice told me that. And in that experience, it's the only way that I can describe it, is when that voice spoke to me and I instantly started to freak out, I felt, this is the only way I can describe it, I literally felt this feeling of zhik, and whatever this was that was connected to me, leading me through CPR, instantly was separated from me. And I felt the feeling, separation. And now this voice is, you know, it didn't say anything more, basically, but now it was like I was connected to that. I can't explain it. I was connected to whatever that was. And I just started freaking out. Like, I just started like screaming, waving my arms, going nuts, because now I thought that was it. He's dead. You know what I mean? Because of that voice. But as I'm panicking and as I'm freaking out, the ambulance pulls up out front of my house. So, you know, I still got my kid in my arms, and he was actually coming back to life. But I was in such a panic and I was freaking out so bad that I couldn't even tell that he was coming back to life, you know. So the ambulance comes over, and by the time they get to me, he's already, you know, now coming back to life and already like breathing basically on his own. Even though they still took him, and they actually helicopter flew him to the children's hospital that was like, I don't know, an hour away or whatever. But he ended up being perfectly fine. Once he got to that hospital, he spent the weekend there. They did every test that they could possibly do on him, and everything came back 100% as if he had never even drowned. So, and in his experience, he's now 27 years old. He was 3 then. But when we talk about things like this now later in life, you know, because especially just this past year, because I learned about NDEs and stuff like that, he finally admitted to me that the only thing that he can remember when he died was that he remembers seeing this is the only way he can describe it. It almost looked like a entity that was all in black. So it was like almost like a hoodie black, all black. And he said, and that's all I remember from that experience. So he kind of had like a near death like experience, but he was only 3, so it's probably why he can't really remember too many details. So that was another like huge, profound thing that happened to me, that even though my son had drowned and I went through that whole experience, the spiritual aspect of that was so huge to me that I literally went on to a Christian radio station the following weekend, because they were doing like this drive where they were trying to collect money to keep their radio station going, and so they were doing these live things. And I went on there and I told the whole story about what had just happened to me the following weekend before that with my son. Like, it was so huge. Like, I know the situation was traumatic, but the spiritual thing that happened to me was so mind-blowing. Even the feeling of that feeling where I just felt that zip, you know what I mean? Like I separated. It was almost like I separated from the light and now I'm connected to the dark. And that's why I know that there's dark and there's light. I just know, you know? And so that was the last like really profound thing that has happened to me.
Tammy, thank you so much for sharing. Do you mind if I ask you a couple quick questions?
Yes, please.
Okay. After having all these experiences, and then your experiences in the Christian churches, you said that you just wanted to know the truth and you started studying to find the answers. Have you found any answers that explain what you've experienced?
Well, I found out that when I was in the church, I was being kept from experiencing what is real, and that is that we have an obvious spiritual realm that exists right here, literally outside of our bodies. And so I knew that was truth, and I've always known that was truth. I just thought that the church was going to agree with me, and they didn't. So they are, it's more, church is just an organization for people to get together and say, I went to church on Sunday or whatever, is my own opinion, a gathering place.
Do you have any thoughts on what we're doing here in this life? If such a beautiful spiritual realm is available just outside of our bodies, what are we doing here, and why do we go through the suffering that we do here?
It's a rough one for me, but the only thing that I can say is that it has to be some sort of learning experience. We must either wanted to go through, or we all have to, at some point in our spiritual journey, have to go through. Gosh, that is just a tough one for me. I don't really know for sure. I've heard people talk about we planned this beforehand, but I say to myself, like, who the heck would plan on putting their self through all that I went through?
Right.
To be where I'm at now, like, I can't say 100% exactly why, but I do know that when I experienced my experience where I went to the paradise place, I knew that I needed to come back and tell everybody. That's all I wanted to do, is tell everybody, just so that they could come back, so that they could not be blinded, like there's almost like a veil over people's eyes, because I've seen also that veil lift off of my eyes where I could see into, like, I see a whole different world. I still see a whole different world. Once that veil thing was lifted off my eyes, I could see a different world, and I still see it. And I just want to see the veil lifted up off of people's eyes, because if it was, and they could see like into the spiritual realm the way that I have, there wouldn't be abuse. There wouldn't be all that goes on in this world, because it would just be so wonderful. That's the only way I can describe it. It would just be so wonderful. This whole earth experience would be wonderful if people could literally just see the truth of how wonderful things are in the spiritual realm, you know? So I don't know. I don't know why we have to go through this, for sure. You know, and I have a hard time believing that I planned this beforehand, but at the same time, it could be true also. I don't know. I just picked a really tough road to go down. I don't know what I was thinking back then when I chose it.
Love your honesty with that. One other thing I wanted to tell you, when you were describing your experience and you were emphasizing how there was no darkness there, no shadows, that's also my experience. And I've tried to make paintings of my experience, and I have done some paintings, but it's impossible because you can't paint, like you cannot convey how bright that light is in this world without using dark colors and contrast. And it's so frustrating trying to like paint that in a way for people to understand. It was all light. Everything was light, and there's no way you can portray that.
Exactly. I know exactly what you're saying. See, you're another person that knows what I mean by the light. Felt what I felt.
Yes.
The feeling of how intense. You can never put it into human words. I don't care how many billions you put on the feeling of intensity. It still doesn't even compare to how intense the feeling is that you get there. The colors there don't exist here, and they're the most beautiful colors you could ever lay your eyes on, you know?
Well, Tammy, I've loved this conversation so much, and I want to thank you so much for being willing to share your experiences. I forgot to ask you before the beginning if there's any links that you wanted me to share. Do you have a website or anything like that?
I am starting a YouTube channel, and this might sound out of the ordinary, just in case anybody wants to know. I have not done any videos yet because I'm not set up properly with everything that I need to set it up, but it's called Let's Talk Aliens.
Well, I will put that link for your YouTube in the description so people can find that. Tammy, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
This was fun. Thank you.
Good. I'm so
Thank you. You have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you for watching the Love Covered Life podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, share this video with your friends, and comment with your thoughts and opinions. And check the description box for the links to my TikTok and Instagram, where I share the more personal side of my life, my website, where I share my paintings and merch, and also the Be a Guest link for anybody who's interested in sharing their story. Be loved, be happy, be at peace, and thank you for watching.